Waiting for the live stream.
Live stream is rolling.
Thank you. Sergeants, with your recordings, please.
Recording to the PC underway.
Cloud is rolling.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's remote New York City Council hearing of the Committee on Youth Services. At this time, would all panelists please turn on your videos for verification purposes. To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices to vibrate or silent. If you wish to submit testimony, you may send it to testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that's testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you for your cooperation. Chair Stevens, we are ready to begin.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Althea Stevens, Chair of the New York City Council's Committee on Youth Services. Welcome to today's virtual oversight hearing on DYCD Community Center programming, Beacons, Cornerstones, and Saturday Night Lights. Today's hearing is focused on Beacons, Cornerstones, and Saturday Night Lights, three programs that were developed to provide a public space to address a community's basic social, economic, and cultural needs. Saturday Night Lights is a violence prevention and youth development program operated by community-based organizations in partnership with NYPD. SNL uses underutilized gyms and recreation centers to provide sports programs for kids ages 11 through 18, each Saturday from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., a time when youth are most at risk of being affected by crime. Beacons and Cornerstones are DYCD 2 community center programs. Though both programs are served as community hubs that offer year-round services to all ages, they serve slightly different populations. Beacon programs are located within 91 public schools throughout the city and serve their surrounding communities. Cornerstones are community centers located within 99 Nycha buildings. Those Cornerstone programs are in unique positions to engage the population of disconnected youth and young adults it is so important to invest in right now. Despite their differences, SNL, Beacons, and Cornerstones were all designed to provide safe and enriching environments for youth to spend time with when they're not in school. School-age children spend 80% of their time waking hours outside of their homes. This time is critical to youth development. As SNL reminds us, it's time where youth can be at most at risk or opportunities for them to be enriched and uplifted and aided by their communities. Studies have shown that quality enrichment programs can improve school performances, promote social and emotional, cognitive, academic development, as well as reduce risky behavior, crime, and juvenile delinquency. I don't have to rely just on research to appreciate the value of these programs. I've spent the last 12 years of my life operating DYCD programs, and during much of that time, I worked in local community centers. In preparation for this hearing, I also spent the last few weeks touring various Beacons, Cornerstones, and Saturday Night Light programs and community centers. As a result of all these experiences, I've learned a lot about the programs and full potential of Beacons, Cornerstones, and SNL programming. Community centers are more than just the service they provide. They are spaces where neighborhoods can bond, learn together, support each other. They show us the undeniable value of personal connections. As a community leader, I was able to expose young people to new opportunities and help them build connections with their larger community. I've also seen how the programs are undetermined by the lack of funding, poor conditions between agencies and CBOs, and disconnects between providers and the communities they are meant to serve. It is essential for quality program that CBOs see the community as partners and a resource. Today's hearing is about holding all parties accountable. We will examine not just DYCD's role, but how providers, other city agencies, and we the public can better support Beacons, Cornerstones, and Saturday Night Light programs. I want to thank the staff behind the scenes, making sure the online is running smoothly. I'd like to thank Youth Committee staff for their work on this issue, Committee Counsel Amy Briggs, Policy Analyst Anastasia Zamna, Financial Unit Head Aliyah Ali, And I would like to thank my Chief of Staff and Budget Director, Kate Connolly, and my Communications Manager, Ty Brown. Thank you. And at this time, I would like to acknowledge all my colleagues who are here with us today, Councilmember Hanks, Councilmember Osei, Councilmember Gail Brewer, and that is all I see for now. And thank you.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. I'm Amy Briggs, counsel to the New York City Council's Committee on Youth Services. I'll be moderating today's hearing and calling panelists to testify. Before we begin, please remember that everyone will be on mute until I call on you to testify. After you are called on, you will be unmuted by a member of our staff. Note that there will be a few second delay before you are unmuted and we can hear you. For public testimony, we will call up individuals in panels. Please listen for your name, and I will periodically announce the next few panelists. All public testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. After I call your name, please wait for the Sergeant at Arms to announce that you may begin before starting your testimony. Council member questions will be limited to 5 minutes. And council members, please note that this includes both the questions and your witnesses' answers. Please also note that we will allow for a second round of questions at today's hearing, and these will be limited to 2 minutes, again, including both your question and the witnesses' answers. For today's hearing, the first panel will include representatives from DYCD, followed by council member questions and then public testimony. From the administration, we will hear from Darrell Rattray, Associate Commissioner for Youth Services and Strategic Partnerships, Wanda Asherle, Assistant Commissioner for Community Centers, and Joyce Duvers, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships. I will now administer the oath to the administration. When you hear your name, please respond once a member of our staff unmutes you. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Associate Commissioner Rattray?
I do.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner Wanda Asherle?
I do.
Thank you. And Senior Director Joyce Duvers?
I do.
Thank you. Associate Commissioner Darrell Rattray, you may begin your testimony when ready.
Thank you, Emmy. Good afternoon, Chair Stevens and members of the Committee on Youth Services. I am Darrell Rattray, Associate Commissioner for Youth Services and Strategic Partnerships. I am joined by Wanda Asherle, Assistant Commissioner for Community Centers, and Joyce Duvers, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss our community center programming, Beacons, Cornerstones, and Saturday Night Lights. These programs are critical in DYCD's mission to invest in a network of community-based organizations and programs to alleviate the effects of poverty and to provide opportunities for New Yorkers and communities to flourish. In the early 1990s, Mayor David Dinkins launched the Safe Street, Safe City initiative to tackle New York City's high crime rate. He recognized that a larger police force couldn't be the only strategy to combat crime. It had to be combined with community policing and providing young people and community members with safe places and enrichment and recreational opportunities. The mayor also recognized that many school buildings sat empty after school during weekends and the summer, which could be used to offer activities for young people and families across the city, and the Beacon program was born. The Beacons provide activities and services for school-age youth, families and adults aged 22 years and older, including seniors. In keeping with the original concept, programs make special efforts to engage hard-to-recruit youth and young adults for whom participation in activities that foster positive youth development, social-emotional learning, and leadership skills that are especially beneficial. Programs operate for a minimum of 42 hours over 6 days in the afternoons and evenings, on weekends and school holidays, and during school recess periods. Beacons have become a national and international model since their inception. Beacons have served millions of young people and adults. Currently, there are 92 Beacons this year. The program is on track to serve over 109,800 youth and families. Following years of federal disinvestment in public housing, in 2009, the New York City Housing Authority announced the closure of community centers it operated. Thanks in large part to the strong advocacy of the council, the city announced a plan to ensure continuity of services at 25 Nycha community centers. Using city tax levy funding, we begin what is now known as the Cornerstone program. In the time since then, the program has grown and now offers services at 99 developments across the city. These programs, administered by local nonprofits, help young people acquire the academic foundation and skills they need to graduate from high school, succeed in the workplace, and give back to your communities. Programming was shaped by input from young people, Nycha residents, resident association leaders, and principals at schools that serve youth who live in the participating developments. Activities include academics, homework help, STEM activities, and high school and college prep. Cornerstone programs also serve adults through general education diploma and English for speakers of other languages instruction, job preparation, parenting skills, tenant education and advocacy, and intergenerational programming. To date, these centers have served over 19,500 participants. In 2021, the NYPD partnered with the Department of Youth and Community Development, the city's district attorneys, and community-based organizations to open 100 gyms and expand its Saturday Night Lights program. SNL is a summer program that provides access to free youth sports programming on Saturday nights. Actually, a correction, we'll send an updated copy, but SNL is a year-round program that provides access to free youth sports programming on Saturday nights. Last month, Mayor Adams kicked off the spring season of Saturday Night Lights at PS 244 in Mott Haven. Last year, DYCD partnered with the New York Police Department, the city's district attorney's offices, the Parks Department, and our Cornerstone and Beacon providers to expand the program. Each Saturday from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., children from 11 to 18 years of age participate in sports, including basketball, soccer, volleyball, dance, martial arts, and others. Programs take place in gyms and local parks, weather permitting. These initiatives, along with the Summer Youth Employment Program, are critical in the mayor's effort to protect our communities and create a safe, prosperous city for all New Yorkers. Last month, Mayor Adams announced Summer Rising 2.0, which will serve 110,000 elementary and middle school students this summer. We appreciate the support of Chair Stevens, who, with the mayor and Chancellor Banks, at the special announcement at the P&J Beacon in the Bronx. Summer 2022 will offer a new opportunity to engage youth and families in joyful and skill-building activities, bringing together the strengths of DYCD-funded summer enrichment initiatives and DOE's academic programs in a coordinating experience for young people. We are pleased to announce that registration began today through an enrollment portal hosted by the Department of Education. It's important to note that Beacon and Cornerstone programs are complemented by our large after-school initiative, the Compass program, which is at approximately 900 locations. Compass NYC began as out-of-school time in 2005. New York City's trailblazing efforts at ensuring access to quality after-school for all these young people have been recognized nationally in publications like Hours of Opportunity by the Wallace Foundation, among others. In total, these programs are on track to serve over 200,000 participants. Since 2009, youth have participated in Step It Up NYC, a youth engagement program to create change. Each year, nearly 100 teams and more than 1,000 young people audition to create positive change across all 5 boroughs. Through the competition, dance and step teams plan community service projects and develop citywide social campaigns to speak up about issues that impact their communities, including education, health, equality, and opportunity, peace and tolerance, and safe communities. Since 2017, youth have also participated in the DYCD Young Sharks competition. This project-based activity for youth ages 14 to 24 incorporates business basics and product design, financial literacy, work readiness, and leadership development. This May and June, we will engage youth in collaboration with the Hip Hop Youth Summit Youth Council using the digital Demand on Demand business curriculum. Youth will create a product design, develop a business plan, and construct a prototype to raise their voice against gun violence. Teams will have the opportunity to win up to $2,500 to the first place team, $2,000 to the second place team, and $1,500 for an Audience Choice Award for the business team with the most social media pledges against gun violence. The top 3 finalists will meet and receive mentorship from the Shark Tank's own co-star, Damian John. The finalists will also showcase their business ideas at the DYCD Anti-Gun Violence Awareness Day, projected to take place on June 3rd. Thank you once again for this opportunity to testify today. We will be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Before I turn to Chair Stevens for questions, I'd like to remind council members to use the raise hand function in Zoom to indicate that they have a question for the panel. I will now turn to Chair Stevens for questions.
Yes. Thank you for your opening. We all know that obviously with Cornerstones and beacons and things like that, it's an RFP, but just a little bit of engaging us on like how are Cornerstones and beacon sites chosen other than like the RFP? Is there consideration taken for neighborhoods with less youth programming? And what are the different factors that are taken into consideration when we're thinking about these programs? Could we unmute Mr. Rattler, please?
Perfect. So Chair Stevens, we're currently at 99 Nycha community centers across the city. I think the need is taken into account physical space, so whether or not they have a community center that can house a Cornerstone program. There's quite a few slated for renovations. One example of that is Gowanus, where the center, we toured the center and created a punch list, if you will, of what needs to happen in order for us to place a Cornerstone program there. The Gowanus renovation should take through 2024, 2025. And then once it opens up, we'll have funding to place a Cornerstone program at that location. But we do take into account young people within a development as well as community need.
So what are the considerations? Like, how are you considering like programming? Are we looking at other programs that are in a certain radius? Like, could I get a little more detail? Because I hear your one site in Gowanus, that's great, but we're talking about citywide. How are we looking at where are we placing these programs and what's the need? Are we looking at a proximity to beacons and cornerstones? I would love a little bit more detail around that.
So in upping the 99, so we started with 25, then I want to say January 2014, we added on an additional 45 and then another 25 in 2015. Because of the location of Cornerstones, we didn't necessarily take into account the other services throughout that neighborhood. We were looking at a development where there may have been historical programming located at, and knowing that there may be a need with that and within that community, and creating a program that focused on that neighborhood, that community, and for the most part, that development.
Okay. So what happens when a community center wants to be a Cornerstone? Because it's my understanding that not all community centers are Cornerstones. So what happens if you want to be a Cornerstone because you have very limited capacity around the programs that you're providing if you're not a Cornerstone?
So in some cases, we received requests. So Gowanus was one of those examples where we received the request from the council member at the time to create a Cornerstone program at Gowanus. We went out there with Nycha, again, assessed the facility, figured out what was needed. For instance, I think the fire alarm system needed to be repaired. The Nycha goes back, specs up a plan to make those renovations. And then again, once that Gowanus opens up and the center's ready, we can activate a Cornerstone program there. So I think each individual case is unique. So
I love that you keep talking about Gowanus, but there's other programs that are running currently as, like, let's say they are a Compass program or something like that, and they're saying they would love to be a Cornerstone because it comes with additional funding and the model is more holistic. How do they then request to be a Cornerstone if it's just like a request, or is there a request? How's it taken into consideration?
So there's not a request process, but if they reach out to us, again, we can bring this up with folks and see if it's viable and funding's available to create a Cornerstone program out of that site. The latest example of that was Eastside House, where we did receive a request from the council member to create a more holistic style programming within the South Bronx at those three sites of Mitchell, Patterson, and Millbrook. And then what we did was add on the differences in programming and funding to create a Cornerstone-like model.
Yeah, I know, and I was a part of that process because we fought really hard for that, and that came through the Closed Rikers Island and the funding that we were able to secure through there. And so that was through her. So what happens if a council member doesn't have additional funding for some reason? How do they then? Because for example, in my district specifically, I have a number of community centers who are not Cornerstones. And they said that they don't know why they were not chosen to be one when a lot of these community centers converted over. So that's why I'm asking these questions. And I'm also hearing that that is something that a few, because it's not that many left, there's only a few that's not Cornerstones. And I'm just not understanding why those haven't been converted over yet.
Yeah, Chair Stevens, I would say if you have them or your office can reach out to us with the listing of those sites. In the very beginning, we were RFPing every center out. So it could have been that the provider at the center had a lease with Nycha where they couldn't be turnover at that center because of an RFP. I know that's different with Eastside House recently. And again, I think that opens the door for other opportunities. But if you can send a list of those sites, then we can take a look at them and then you get back.
I will definitely send you a list of sites that are in my district and throughout the city to make sure that we can start that conversation, because it's not that many sites that have not been converted. And I'm just confused on why, when we transitioned over and taking over the program from Nycha, we didn't just transition over all of the sites instead of having these inequalities. So moving on to SNL sites, how were the SNL sites chosen? Are crime statistics used to make that determination?
So yes, and I'll start, and Joyce, if I miss anything, please jump in. So first we reached out to our providers, inquiring on who wanted to operate an SNL site. We put the criteria up for them, and then we took those proposed sites and we met with NYPD and the DA's offices, and they looked at crime stats across the city and locations where it would be a good fit to place an SNL site for that neighborhood.
Yes, and I could also add on excellent relationship with NYPD and local DA offices, because historically we had 20 SNL sites already operating around the city. So we're able to use that model to then inform how we expand to the 100 locations. That with also peered site visits to see the needs and the ability to kind of lift an SNL site. We also use that in consideration. And of course, seeing how we could also partner with our local priests to make sure that we have the appropriate partners coming in to make sure the SNL sites are living from week to week.
So crime statistics were looked at after you chose the provider. So we chose the providers and then we chose locations.
No, we asked which providers were interested so we can have at least a sense of where we can activate an SNL site if that particular location was feasible, if that neighborhood was feasible. And then we filtered that through NYPD and the DA's office, and we came down to 100 sites across the city that would provide SNL services.
I see the public safety chair is here, and so I know she has a couple of questions around the SNL sites. So I'll let her ask those questions when we open it up. So I'll move on. I have a number of questions still, but how does the programming offered through Beacons and Cornerstone community centers compare to Compass and Sonic?
So the way when folks ask me that, the way I put it is, Compass and Sonic have very focused audiences that they work with. So there are many Compass elementary programs that work with elementary youth. There are Sonic programs that work with middle school youth. Then we have Compass High and pilot programs. A Beacon or Cornerstone is a holistic community center working with all ages within that neighborhood and tailoring programming and activities to meet the needs of that neighborhood as well.
Are there consequences for underperforming providers?
So if a provider continues to underperform, of course, before we get to the point of like penalizing them, we are working with them. We're providing technical assistance.
Can you give me details about what working with them looks like?
Yep. So we're providing coaching and support. So we're out there with them. Our staff are out there. I've even been out at sites having conversations about middle school retention in a neighborhood where the middle schools were far away from the community center. So we're out there coaching, we're providing technical assistance, professional development if needed for that team, that staff. But it could get to the point where we are penalizing them, we are writing them up. And in the worst case scenarios, when it happens, there may be provider turnover.
How many times has that happened? How many times have providers there's been turnover?
Quite a few.
Could I get a number?
In the past couple of years, because of the pandemic, not many, but Before that, there was at least, I would say, a handful, 4 or 5.
4 or 5. So there's only been 4 or 5 underperforming providers. Okay.
Not consistently underperforming, I would say. So that sometimes the provider may underperform, and we give them an opportunity, whether it's to a strategic action plan that they develop and then implement, or corrective action plan to get back on track.
Okay. I just think that it's important that we are also holding our providers to very high standards as well, because it's crucial for our young people. And sometimes there's a lot of providers who've been in places for a long time, and there's a disconnect between the communities and the programming. And if we don't ever have a conversation about it, it's never going to change. So those things are really important to me, of like, what is holding the providers just as accountable as we are holding DYCD and anyone else accountable, right? This is going to be a group effort. And sometimes we need to be looking at what needs to be changed. And sometimes that might be a provider, which isn't a terrible thing. So just want to make sure that we highlight that as well. How does programming offered through, how many New York City Nycha community centers that have not been converted into, I don't know if you have the number, what's the number of Nycha community centers that have not been converted to Cornerstones?
I don't have that number. We would have to get that from Nycha.
Well, could I get that number? I would really like that number. And also, I would love to also get the number of how many community centers we have throughout Nycha. To what extent does DYCD collect data about participants through its programming? Is the collected data used to inform or support other related youth services?
So we collect enrollment, retention, attendance data for young people. We know which activities they are in and which programs they're enrolling in and participating in, of course. We are looking for that information to inform concept papers, inform RFPs, and the type of programming we are conducting and releasing.
How are we collecting any data on like services young people might need to have? Because I think that is really important. I think I said this in another hearing before, a lot of times we're collecting data that doesn't seem as useful as if, do you need shelter? Do you need food? Like, how are those things being collected? And I think that it's important. That's something that we're tracking and collecting.
Indeed. So we have started citywide surveys. Coincidentally, the last one came right before the pandemic, and it was a subset of data collected in Staten Island. And the one thing that we found, that there was a food desert and food shortage in parts of Staten Island. And this is right before the pandemic started. So we're looking to continue that sort of community surveying that we've been doing. And again, that will help inform RFPs, concept papers, and future programming.
I think that it's nice that we collect information for surveys, but I think that it's important that we're also collecting data that could be useful for our participants, right? Mm-hmm. If we have opportunity to meet with families and participants, we should be collecting information on, do you need a home? Do you need food services? Do you need to be reconnected with schools? Do we need all these things, like a missed opportunity over and over again? So I think we should be looking at that and considering how we're going to move forward to be collecting data that's useful for our young people. What is the role of Nycha TA leaders in your Cornerstones?
So every advisory board, every Nycha community program should have an advisory board. And on that advisory board—
what happens if they don't have an advisory board?
Then we would need to work with them and get the advisory board up and running. And we have a couple of cases like that where, yeah, the advisory board hasn't been functioning the way it should have been, even before the pandemic in some cases. But
can you tell us what a functioning advisory board looks like?
So a functioning advisory board should consist of both at least two duly elected residents who are on the resident association or resident council, parents, young adults, business stakeholders in that community, representatives from the local schools that may be feeder sites for that community as well. And they should come together monthly to quarterly to discuss that program, discuss the neighborhood, discuss what the needs are to ensure that that program is tailoring what they do to meet some of those needs.
Okay. And so I guess we were saying how the Nycha leaders are supposed to be involved in the programming.
Yeah, so one way is that they sit on an advisory board and they help support that program and support that board. Other ways, we have programs who meet with their resident leaders weekly, monthly, in the best practice. In other cases, you know, these are relationships that we are working on to mediate.
Okay. What extent does DYCD collect community and parent input for your Cornerstones and Beacons and SNL programs?
So the advisory board is one way of them collecting that input. The other way is what I mentioned earlier around the community surveys that we've been doing and we're going to continue to do. Ideally, when we do release a Cornerstone concept paper and an RFP, we'll have I want to say sort of I can't think of the word for it, but a overview of each development and the feedback that we're getting back from parents, from young people, from young adults for that particular development. So anyone proposing for that development could read the snapshot. That's all I want to say. Could read the snapshot and see what young adults are saying about the previous programming, also what they want, and same for young people as well.
How does your program support the integration of formerly incarcerated individuals or those with previous criminal history?
So we have a few providers that have an expertise in working with young people who have, or young adults who have formerly been incarcerated. They use them as credible messengers. They use them in programming at times to talk to other young people who may be at high risk and out there.
Are there barriers from participating in any programming?
No, as long as young people, young adults are respectful and follow the rules, there shouldn't be any barriers as long as you're following the rules.
Are there barriers from volunteering and teaching or staffing in any of these programs?
Based on their, of course, they need to pass the background check. So based off of their record, it depends. Each case is going to be unique.
Because I am hearing that there's a significant issue with young people who may have had like minor issues with the law, haven't been able to be employed at these programs, which I think is terrible when we're trying to get them reincorporated back into the community. So how do we address this? Because I think that you know, it causes a disconnect.
Chair Stevens, each case is unique. So I would say if any provider is having an issue with a young person, I would love to sort of have them reach out to me so we can drill down into that case and speak with DOHMH and see if there's anything that we can do to support.
This is an issue. I have spoke to a couple of providers around this, so I'll definitely have them reach out to you. But when we were going out, and even in my time when I was working in community centers, there was a number of young people who were not able to be employed in the program because they had an issue when they were 16 or whatever, and they couldn't work in the program because the background wasn't clear. So I think that is something we definitely need to look at. Obviously, we want to keep kids safe and we want to make sure that everyone is okay, but some of the backgrounds or the restrictions are a little concerning to me, because it's like, how do we then integrate them back into the city? Because like you said, they are incredible messengers. They have been in the place of these young people and have turned their lives around, so should be able to work with them. And even when we're talking with some of the cure violence sites, they were saying like they can't go into schools because they have a background. And so it's like, at what point do we, you know, keep having these people have these same issues and facing these barriers when they're trying to do good and promote good things in their community? So we definitely need to talk more about that. Taking into consideration the program model and staffing requirements, when are the community center staff supposed to take vacation and have time off? Because that is another issue that has been coming up, is that a lot of the center staff is burnt out and they're exhausted. And when are they supposed to take time off? Because if folks don't know, these programs, they are typically open for vacation camp. They are open during the holidays, on the weekends. And I remember working in this program, especially in the summer. I was literally working from 8 to 11 p.m. every day, 7 days a week. That was the expectation. So with this model, and especially with such a low per participant rate, and we not allowed or able to get more staff, when is vacation supposed to be taken? Like, we would love to hear what the planning is around that, because staff is burnt out, especially after this pandemic, and they've been out in the community for the last 2 years, feeding and taking care of the community. They're burnt out.
So the normal window of time for vacation is usually the end of August through early September. There should be a window where no programming is operating and planning is happening.
You know that's not right. You know when? What's the dates?
Can I get back to you on the dates?
Yeah, you send me those dates because I'm gonna put it up and tell everybody we all out, we off.
And then also end of June into July. But I know a lot of training
You mean end of June when they doing orientation?
into early July.
Yeah, so that window is when they're doing vacation for summer programming.
And some providers, you know, they've been through this for some time. They have a history and experience, so they may stagger staff, and some staff are going on vacation while other staff are coming on to continue programming.
Yeah, but then when they do that, they're not meeting their numbers for their SAC regulations for the participants. So I just think that these are things that we have to have conversations about and need to be talking about because it's real.
Sure.
Our staffs are burnt out, and because the rate of pay is so low, you can't hire more staff. So you just literally have people working until they can't work anymore.
And Chair Stevens, the reason why, you know, I smile when you ask the question, because yeah, it's been an ongoing conversation. It is a tough one that we should all talk about at one point again. On one hand, we know these services are vital, and like late summer is a time when programming needs to be up and running. At the same time, staff are burned out. Staff need vacation time, and yeah, that juggle has been something that we've been trying to figure out and make modifications to allow over time. But we should definitely continue that conversation.
I literally visited a provider on my tour, and her biggest concern is that she will not have staff for the summer because they said, I just can't do it anymore. So the problem is we are burning out good staff and good people where they are just saying, I can just go, at this point, I can go work at, you know, fast food or somewhere else and get paid the same amount because the pay rate is so low, and do less work and get paid the same amount of money because we're literally burning staff out. So we really have to be thinking about what this looks like and how we are really supporting staff, because it's not fair and it's unacceptable at this point. And like I said, I remember doing it, and we do it because it's a labor of love. And I remember I used to say all the time, I run program on love. And so at some point, love just isn't enough. So it's important that we're thinking about this and having real conversation about this and looking to change it, right? So, you know, my suggestion is let's fund it adequately so that we can have adequate staff, so that we can have staggered schedules so people can take time off. But like the way it's going now is just not fair, and it doesn't seem right. And it seems like it's abusive at this point. So my next question is, how many Cornerstone sites had Wi-Fi upgrades, and when did it take place?
Oh, wow, great question. I want to say we had upwards of 25 to 50 that went through Wi-Fi upgrades, and there are multiple layers of this, but the latest one took place during the pandemic. So this is sometime between the start of the pandemic into 2021. I can get you details on that as well.
Yes, please send me back the details, because I know there was a couple of sites who had upgrades, but then I was at some who said that they didn't. So I would love to see what site got upgrades and why weren't the other sites who didn't get them yet, didn't get them, and then when they will get their upgrades. What is being done to support Cornerstones with their summer enrollment? That's another huge issue that I'm hearing, especially with the expansion of Summer Rising. Providers are very nervous about what summer looks like for them, because, you know, when things are shiny and new, everyone wants to throw all the services at other programs, but Cornerstones and Beacons have been here for a number of years. And I think it's just as important that we put effort in supporting Cornerstones and Beacons as well around enrollment. So what are we doing to support them with their enrollment numbers?
Well, one is them knowing, you know, all the Cornerstone programs have registered contracts so that they know they can move forward with the enrollment period. We're working with them on their work scopes, working with them on their enrollment period. They're also aware of what's happening with Summer Rising as well. And we're supporting them either through social media, through creation of flyers and signage that they can help spread the word as well. And we're also being flexible around enrollment. Again, we're not penalizing them because, you know, it took you a little bit longer to get to your full enrollment or you didn't meet your full enrollment. We're helping support them in those rare cases.
Yeah, I mean, because like I said, a number of the Cornerstones and Beacons that I've visited these last 2 weeks had some concerns because, you know, students are mandated through summer school to go to Summer Rising, and a lot of their numbers are already going to be built in, where they're going to be pretty much taking the kids from the Beacons and Cornerstones. And so for me, it's just thinking about how are we making sure that we're supporting them to make sure that that's not happening, and what does this really look like, and how are we making sure that all of these folks are communicating? Because, you know, my big thing is who's talking and how they're talking, how does these things being communicated amongst each other? And
Chair Stevens, that's the point that was made by providers is a really good point. And then we'll reshare with community center providers and Cornerstones in particular, that we're here to support them, and we're not going to penalize them for late enrollment or enrollment issues that they're having.
Okay. So SNL cited that 45 of the 100 recently opened gyms were not open. Why is that? I heard that 45 of the gyms or SNL sites have not been opened or had trouble opening. It's about 45 sites out of the 100.
No, so there's currently 106 SNL programs across the city, and I think we're trending 99% open. There may be one or two that reach out to us and say, hey, we can't open this particular Saturday, but we can do the next Saturday. So if there's,
so that's what I'm hearing. I've gotten word from a few credible sources that said that there's about 45 sites that have not been open, or like you said, I guess struggled with opening and still have been struggling. And how does that impact funding?
And Joyce, go ahead, shoot. Oh, can someone
unmute her?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. So we send out weekly touch points with our providers, and from week to week they're able to communicate their open and closure rates, and that was correct. We are up to about 99% open. They'll have some issues that come up maybe week to week, either you know, center closures for either whatever updates they're having, but week to week they're able to tell us, and we have, of course, the rates our young people are coming in and out of centers. As far as your question, I think
how often could they close week to week before we see it as an issue and think about moving on from providers? Because that's
right. Right, good question. So the understanding is that providers are going to be able to be open 46 weeks out of the year. Now, I'll say that this is our pilot year, and it did take some of support, a lot of site visits to be able to go out to make sure that all providers were able to open up. We did provide a lot of support around their issues around staffing and gave a little bit of leniency from week to week as they were able to staff up. But we also had partnership meetings with our CBOs, any partners, and we actually wrapped some up this week. Any partners that we saw had a little bit of issues as far as opening or attendance, we were able to actually triage with them and be able to create an action plan. But the understanding is that we are proud to say that we are around 99% open, and our doors are open for young people to come out.
And when you say 99% open, are they open the entire time? Because that's also what I'm hearing, that sites are not staying open the full time that they're allotted. They're closing early or they're opening late, and it's kind of a free for all.
Oh, no, not a free for all. I mean, any information that come in, please share. You know, we have not only our eyes in, but we have visits coming in from our partners from the DA's office and the NYPD. It is a full citywide effort to make sure our CBOs are supported and adhering to the program plan of, you know, the full hours. But the understanding expectation is that yes, they'll be open for full hours. Any program that has any type of issue is supposed to report it, and then we then inform partners and of course our young people to make sure that they know which centers are open for them to be able to go visit.
So I think again, like what happens when they aren't consistent? How many times do you get to close your center regularly? What are those procedures?
So coming out of, again, what I said, that, you know, coming out of COVID and be able to staff up, and of course this is a pilot year to get everything streamlined, we are now getting into the space that we are creating action plans with centers and looking to see any programs that are having any type of true week to week issue with opening, and then we will then be able to take the steps they needed to either address some of the issues and or see what other actions that we could have to make sure that the community is being served.
Well, I definitely would love to hear more about that. And because consistency is important for young people. If we're not being consistent, then it's a disservice to the young people. So if they're open one Saturday and then close the next, that's not helping, because now the kids are like, oh, I'm not coming back. So
Right.
I think that it's important that we're having consistencies. Young people know the hours and people are opening. And like a lot of times when there are going to be site visits, it's expected. Are we doing pop-up site visits?
Oh, yes,
like
we
what are the
are.
expectations around that? Because I'm going to say this, I did some pop-up visits and people were not open, and that is not okay with me.
For sure, and please share. But yes, there are pop-up visits. Not only do we have staff dedicated here, but again, as I said, that we also have the partnerships with NYPD where CEOs are going out week to week to actually participate in activity with centers. So any information that you have that you can share, we can make sure that we're following the CBOs to make sure that everything is in adherence.
Listen, I will, and I
Okay.
like these programs mean a lot to me, which is why I'm asking the questions that I'm asking, because it's crucial, right? So as much as we want to say, you know, like I said, I'm here to hold ZYCD accountable, but we got to hold the providers accountable too. Like if they're not going to be consistent, then we need to think about how do we move on and get people who are going to get in there and do the work that's going to connect with the community. Those things are important. Our kids need consistency, and they should be getting quality programming. So that is my number one concern. I have quite a few more questions, but I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then I'll kick it off to my colleagues who've been waiting, and then I'll come back to have some more questions. How is funding determined for each program? Are Cornerstone centers still funded at varying levels depending on space availability in each Nycha development?
That is correct. For Cornerstone, it's a matter of the space and the licensing they can receive to serve a certain number of young people. For elementary, the PPP is about 2746. Then for middle school and high school, 1340, and for adults, 619. And then they also get additional funding, as you know, to remain open during the summer, extended hours. So every Cornerstone program is open in the summer, 7 days a week to 11 p.m. And also funding to support cleaning. And that cleaning funding comes in anywhere between $32,000 a year to $75,000 a year based on the size of that particular space.
I'm sorry, you said that for cleaning, they're given $32,000 a year?
From $32,000 to $75,000 to support cleaning staff and supplies is based on the size of the space. So we have some locations that are 3,000 square feet, other locations that are over 22,000 square feet.
What is the formula used to determine Cornerstones and Beacon contract reimbursement? When was the last time that formula was updated?
So the budgets were updated as per the RFPs of each. So Beacon and Wanda, correct me if I'm wrong, Beacon was 2016 and Cornerstone was 2015.
2016 and 2015.
And yep, yes.
So when do you think we should update the new one? Because that's quite some time ago.
So it also ties into a question you asked me earlier around the RFPs. So the RFP timeline is also another opportunity for us to get feedback from stakeholders, from providers about the cost of operating programming and whether that cost changed or not. So I would say the Cornerstone concept paper is going to release the end of this year, December. And that kicks off that process to have those conversations around the type of programming, program quality, also funding as well.
Okay, I'm gonna pause here to have my colleagues ask some questions. I see 2 hands raised.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to remind council members to use the raised hand function in Zoom to indicate that they have a question for this panel. I will now call on council members with questions in the order they have raised their hands. Beginning with, so we will hear from Council Member Hanks, followed by Council Member Brewer.
Start in time.
Thank you so much for Mr. Rattray for being here. My name is Camila Hanks. I'm the Chair of Public Safety. I just want to applaud Chair Stevens in the thorough questioning that she's done thus far, and really was very informative. And I cannot now preface the 4 questions I have with saying, you know, as the Chair of Public Safety, our connection to youth and community services is vital. And it's vital in order for us to understand, you know, the pathway of not being incarcerated, to not having young people caught up in bad actors, is directly connected to the programs and the services that they have on the ground, like the Cornerstones, like the Beacon. I toured the Staten Island Beacon programs and the Cornerstone programs with Chair Stevens, and I learned a great deal. And many of the questions that she's asking, we saw firsthand. And so that's like supremely important that I kind of preface that and make sure that everyone understands the importance of the funding that DYCD gets in youth and community services and the important role they play in all of this and making it a safer city. So that said, you know, as the chair of public safety, how does DYCD see their role in the intervention and prevention component of the mayor's blueprint?
So Councilmember Hanks, thank you for that. You know, you were speaking and it brought me back. I grew up in the Bronx in Lambert Houses. I was a teen in the Beacon program. If it wasn't for that program giving me opportunities for leadership skills and empowerment, yeah, I may have been somewhere else. I wouldn't be here.
Right.
So that's the meaning and sort of the crux of what our programs do. I think we are at the forefront of the mayor's blueprint for public safety and stopping gun violence. We're actually going to, I don't want to ruin it, but we're at the edge of launching a campaign across the city that all of our young people can get involved in, because that's what worked before. It was about everybody stepping up, speaking out about gun violence and violence within their communities, and also showcasing positive things that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
For me back then, it meant, a weird example for a council hearing, but it meant that folks who weren't necessarily doing the right thing thought twice about it. And they knew what was happening, and they thought about the way they showed up in our neighborhoods, and violence actually went down. So I believe we're at the forefront of the mayor's blueprint.
I'm really happy to hear that. Again, you know, what we find important has to be reflected in the budget. So if we care deeply about young people and their futures, then, and I know that Chair Stevens would agree with me, you know, she's probably the best person to be in this role as chair of youth and community services, because she's been there, she's done it, she does the work. I started Staten Island's first youth build program, so I also understand the extreme importance of funded by DYCD, by the way, and so I understand the challenges, and I understand, you know, the challenges that the providers have. And so I think you answered it a little bit, but what is the baseline required to really fund these programs? And does the administration plan to include this amount in its executive budget? You may not know the answer to that, but.
Yeah, so all of our programs are baseline, even Saturday Night Lights, which is our newest program where we're at 100 sites. That is $5 million baseline going forward.
Okay, thank you. And so when we talk about Saturday Night Lights, Chair Stevens, you know, began to ask the question about its being opened and being available without even discussing this with her when I was really doing my due diligence and unpacking the blueprint and speaking to a lot of folks at NYPD. One of their major concerns was that there's no consistency with Saturday Night Lights being opened on a regular basis. And so our ability to have these partnerships is really, and that goes to my last question, which is really capacity with these providers, is that, you know, we have to make sure that one of the biggest complaints was that they could not rely on the regularly scheduled Saturday Night Lights to be opened. And so a lot of that, whether what your understanding is and what Chair Stevens and I separately found out, is that they are not. And so we really need to drill down on that and make sure that if it's a misunderstanding, that it's not, and we do something to deal with that. And my last and final question is, how are we building capacity so the folks and the credible messengers that are actually on the ground doing this violence interruption, who is doing a lot of this work, that they have the ability to be good stewards of, you know, government funding. They understand what it means. They can open, and, you know, what are we doing about, and Chair Stevens also spoke about this, making sure that the funding is available so that the people who are working at this are really being compensated. They they're not being overworked, because when these programs fail, we see it directly on the other side in the public safety component. And so I feel like this is the most important piece in making sure that the public is safe, is really making sure that these programs are working to its full capacity. They're funded. If there are issues, that we are aware of it and we correct it as soon as possible.
So we are in constant communication with providers. All of the community center programming is baseline funding has been registered, so that providers have access to that. In some cases, there may be amendments that haven't been registered yet, but if any of the providers are entering any type of cash flow problem, they can reach out to us. Our fiscal team works with them to ensure that they have access to funding.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Stevens.
Thank you, Councilmember Hanks. Before we turn to Councilmember Brewer for her questions, I would also like to thank and acknowledge council members Aviles, Councilmember Riley, and Councilmember Williams for joining us. Councilmember Brewer, you may now begin with your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and congratulations, Chair Stevens, for pulling this off with such good questions. So as somebody who was there when Richard Murphy started the beacons, and cops and kids was Dinkins's mantra, I think we're trying to get to something that's current in that similar vein. And along with the chair's issues, my understanding from Cornerstones, and IBO has been helping me with this, the Independent Budget Office, is that they're not, you said there are 99 Nycha, so they're not in all Nycha. So my hope, to sort of follow up on the Richard Murphy model, may he rest in peace, is that we have much more open opportunities at Nychas. And we just don't. I mean, the ones in my district, and certainly I know Manhattan, they're closed on the weekends, they're closed most evenings, they don't have the funding. So if we make, I don't know the answer to this, if we make everything in some way, shape, or form a Cornerstone, is that mandated to be open, number one? And secondly, I think Arnie Duncan in Chicago was paying young people in some cases to participate. I'd like to see more of that. I think there's one program in Brooklyn that's doing that. If it's true, and we all love the residents of Nycha, I love the residents of Nycha, but they have an undue burden in terms of challenges for some of their families. So if we focus on Nycha, support, working with MAP, working with some of the other programs that exist, it seems to me that we would help our city, but we're not. We're kind of piecemeal here, piecemeal there. And I also feel very strongly, not only should Saturday Night Live be open all the time, it was closed, for instance, on holiday weekend, a couple weekends ago, closed. I mean, the kids don't know there's a holiday. They still need activities. So how do we have consistency for Saturday Night Live, but also consistency for all Cornerstone, community centers, everything at Nycha. So whether you're at Johnson houses or you're at Amsterdam houses, you know that center is open at 10 o'clock. You don't have to say, oh, I don't know if it's open. We just have to change our complete mentality, in my opinion, on providing youth services for Nycha. And we're not, we're piecemeal. So, and it takes money, but I just think that's where we should be screaming and yelling and saying, where the obviously you have to have good nonprofits, that's another story. But I didn't know, do you guys think like that at DYCD, like think big? I'm just asking.
We Councilman Brewer, one is great seeing you, hearing from you. We do think big. I think it starts with the chair's request from Nycha. What's that inventory of community centers, both centers that may not receive Cornerstone style funding that are operating some type of program, and then two centers that are not operating anything. I think it's going to start with that. And then to your point, the next question becomes, well, two things. One, viability of centers, whether or not that center needs some type of renovations, repairs, upgrades to be able to house a program, and then funding to support that program within the centers.
Okay, but this should be on fast track, not mañana, because we don't have time for that. So, I mean, I can do the Manhattan inventory. We can all do the inventory. I know Yuka at Nycha is on top of this. She's on top of it. I like Greg Russ. He's concerned about the roof, and the future. He couldn't care less. This is not his thing right now. But Yuka's on top of it. And I think this has to be like, I don't know what you're doing internally. We can certainly focus as a council, but this has to be right up there with some of the other priorities of the mayor. This has to be the priority. Centers open all the time, young people paid if needed, and consistency. So it's not, I don't know if this is open or not. And then coordination with the other programs that exist that are working. But I have to say, I don't see that happening at all. And it's not just DYCD, you can't be out there by yourself. So I don't know is anybody leading this effort at City Hall, or should we put some pressure to get that to happen?
I can, again, for the centers that aren't open, we can reach out to Nycha to get that inventory list. And we can start those discussions, I mean, around whether or not centers are viable and whether or not they can be funded. We can start those conversations.
Okay, all right, so we're gonna put pressure on also. I appreciate it, but there's not enough interest in this topic.
Let's put pressure on it because it doesn't seem like it isn't a priority. So let's work together to get that done because.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Brewer, if you are done with your questions? All right, thank you. We will now hear from Councilmember Aviles, followed by Councilmember Riley, and then Councilmember Williams. Councilmember Aviles, you may begin your questions now.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair Stevens, and thank you to all the DYCD staff in the House today. I'd like to, thank you, Councilwoman Brewer, for raising up the critical nature and importance and how we must center NYCHA residents in all of our city services. This is certainly this is a particular area where we need to do much better. So thank you, Councilmember Brewer. I also wanted to focus on NYCHA, and so forgive me since I'm joining a little late if any of these questions have been asked. But I would like to know, I guess, start with, does each Cornerstone Center have a NYCHA contact that they engage with? Also, I'd like to know, is there, do NYCHA residents play any role in programming what happens in Cornerstones? And if so, what does that look like? I'd like to know also if DYCD provides any particular support and particularly related to facility support to the Cornerstone programs. I'll leave it there. And I think there's a bunch of other questions that I also want to add on. So let's start there.
So Cornerstone Community Centers providers, they do have NYCHA contacts, but their first point of contact is DYCD. And then based on whatever the need is, we can help either triage, support, whatever they're trying to do. But they do have contacts within that particular development from property management. And there's also some centralized contacts as well around repairs and things of that nature. To your second question around resident.
Well, can it, Daryl, if you don't mind, you know, I think what I've certainly heard from many a provider and certainly particularly in NYCHA campuses, right, is a kind of a nightmare bureaucracy of like repairs, getting violations from other city agencies for repairs that were NYCHA's responsibilities. So like, what does that, I guess, I don't want you to explain the circle of bureaucracy there, but how could we improve this so that providers are not held should be held harmless for repairs both that NYCHA is responsible for and that we get timely repairs for things that need to get done for the facilities?
So great question. I definitely familiar with the issue. So provider, historically, they would have had violations happen either from FDNY or from DOHMH. We've actually worked over time to stop those violations going to providers. So those FDNY violations now go directly to NYCHA. So NYCHA is the named party on that violation. If there are any providers who are saying they're getting recent violations, they should let us know immediately so we can fix it. But all FDNY violations should be going directly to NYCHA for that particular center of development. DOHMH has halted giving providers any fine violations. So they may notate the repair that's needed, and then they come back for follow-up. With that being said, the next step for either one is for us to work with NYCHA to get the repairs actually done. So NYCHA has a process where there are some repairs they may do directly. There are other repairs where they may have to bring in a vendor to complete the repair.
Okay, so it's probably, it remains at the behest of the 18-year process that seems like everything takes.
The timeline varies.
Sure. In terms of Cornerstone programming and resident engagement in that, what does that look like?
So providers should be getting input from both residents, young people who are participating, adults who are participating monthly from the advisory board meetings, from the discussions. Many of the Cornerstone programs have youth councils and youth groups that are providing that feedback as well. And again, you know, they're flexible in the type of activities they can provide, and that should all be informed by the feedback they're getting from the residents.
Got it. So if I reach out to the Cornerstone, let's say in Red Hook at the McKeel Center, they should be able to offer what the youth council and residents have provided in terms of feedback.
Time expired.
Indeed.
Got it. I guess in terms of the last question was in terms of DYCD providing any support around program facilities, like startup costs or funding to cover costs of repairing spaces or painting. Does DYCD provide any additional supports to the programs?
So no repair programs aren't tasked with doing any repairs. All repairs have to go through NYCHA. And we work to both follow up with NYCHA and ensure that things are happening within a timely manner.
Okay, so you haven't experienced any need for additional supports for Cornerstone programs. I guess generally, right? So like there's facilities, there's also services that organizations might need depending on the state of the situation in the facility, right? They're real different. It could be waste management, additional needs for waste management. Are those things that the programs just have to subsume as their operational costs, or are there options for programs to seek additional support from DYCD?
Great question. And even something like that, like we may have a sewage backup happen at a site. So two things happen at that moment. One, we reach out to NYCHA to see how quickly they can get that site cleaned up and sanitized. Two, we also talk to the program to see, well, maybe we can move them into a school building until that cleanup happens. So that also happens in tandem when the cleanup isn't expedited.
Got it. Chair, if you permit, I just have two more questions.
Yeah, you go ahead, because I have a follow-up question too. So
Thank you. Yeah, many follow-ups. In terms of the Pathways to Wellbeing program, is this a train-the-trainer program, or are there direct services provided to NYCHA residents around it?
Councilmember, the Pathway to Wellbeing is escaping me. I need to.
Yeah, I guess in our briefing, it was a mental health initiative that was done through DYCD and Thrive.
So it's
ringing a bell now.
Yeah, I got it now. Okay. So it is a sort of train-the-trainer program, and services are provided directly to Cornerstone staff and staff who implement.
And is that an ongoing program, and how many staff have been supported through this effort?
I would have to get back to you on the stats, but yes, we've had an ongoing relationship with Thrive and then subsequently the folks who are operating it. But we can get back to you with the stats of how many people have been trained in the past and some of those highlights. Like we've had At Cornerstone sites, we've trained young people to provide peer support and healing circles for what's happening in their neighborhood. And that was pretty successful as well. So we can get back to you with some of those highlights.
Great. I'd love a reporting of that, and also what the plans for expansion are, particularly if it's producing positive outcomes, because we hear a lot about other programs, and this is a particular need. So thank you. I look forward to getting that information. In terms of Saturday Night Lights, I'm sure there's been a ton of discussion on it, but I was just curious, like, is there data kept on the participants of Saturday Night Lights, and kind of like engagement outcomes?
So yes, we do keep every participant of SNL must enroll into our centralized DYC Connect system, or they're enrolled by the provider, and then we track the attendance of each program.
Mm-hmm. Are there other outcomes that are being looked at in terms of that engagement, or is it purely attendance?
Not all my lectures went out. Not that we're tracking in our data system, but providers may be keeping as a best practice other type of outcomes and case management. One thing that we're going to do soon, and part of the campaign that we're going to launch, we're looking at, SNL programs are happening in a particular neighborhood, but we're looking at what it means for those young people who are part of that program to go to other neighborhoods and speak to other young people about what they're dealing with and vice versa. And what does it look like when they collaborate on service projects and things of that nature? So we're starting with this sort of community safety, neighborhood safety approach, providing safe space for young people. But now how do we get those young people to travel citywide and conduct service and other discussions together with other young people, young adults?
Interesting. Okay, and I guess lastly, a very hyper local question. In terms of Beacon programs, I'm sure you don't have this number offhand, but I'd love to know how many Beacon programs operate in my district. I think I have the number, but I would like to make sure that is correct. And explore Beacon.
We can get back to you.
Okay, so I would talk to you more about that. Please, Chair Stevens, I know you have a good follow-up question.
No, I just had a really quick follow-up question, because Mr. Rattler, you said that the first port of contact within Nycha, they should contact DYCD. That has never been my experience, because most of the time you guys ask for a ticket number. So has the process changed where they should be contacting DYCD before repair to help with repairs? Because that's never been my experience, and it's always been put on the provider to work with Nycha to get the work done.
So my response was in them triaging an issue or outstanding repair. So you're absolutely right, Chair Stevens. If there's a repair or something happens right now, they should put the ticket in. So that's immediately. They should go into the system or make the phone call, put the ticket in. If they're not getting a response or follow-up, or if it's an emergency issue, they should also contact us as well to let us know what's happening. We're following up with Nycha to help support.
And so DYCD follows up with Nycha, because that's also has never been my experience for the time that I did not get that support.
We absolutely follow up with Nycha daily on issues across the city.
Maybe it's new, because when I was there, nobody...
One last question. In terms of for Nycha developments that have converted through RAD Impact and are under private management, are there Cornerstone, who do Cornerstone programs? I guess I'd love to know a little bit more about the experience of programs in those developments in terms of the level of service and attention that they're getting, since they don't really fall under Nycha anymore.
So they work with those private management companies to conduct any repairs that are needed. It's a very similar process, but they're not going through the Nycha system for tickets. If there's a delay, they can follow up with us, and we have contacts with those providers, PAC providers as well, to follow up on any repairs or anything that's needed.
Great. I'd love to follow up more on that experience across the city, since it varies between development companies, and there's a lot of confusion around what the providers are and who the providers work for and what those contracts actually look like. So we should talk more about that.
Yeah, Councilmember Aviles, we learned that early on, that in those proposals initially, there was a named social services provider that may or may not have been the provider providing the services within the center. So early on, years ago, that was our first point of mediation, trying to get all parties together to figure out how they work in the same space.
Got it. Thank you. More to come on that. Thank you, Chair Stevens.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Aviles.
Thank you, Councilmember Aviles. We will now turn to Councilmember Williams for her questions.
Starting time.
Hi, I'm actually gonna ask a question, Councilmember Riley's question first, because he had hop off, but his question was in regards to, I suppose, any methodology you all use to determine which communities are getting beacons or Saturday night lights or Cornerstones. I know Cornerstones is specifically for Nycha, but not all Nychas have Cornerstones. So just wanted to understand what type of methodology you all are using to locate these sites.
So I'll use the latest beacon, actually, the newest beacon that launched this past January was actually in Councilmember Riley's district. So I'll use that as an example. That request came from the council member's office who have been reaching out to communities and convening folks. And one of their requests was, look, we need an additional youth program, holistic community center in this neighborhood. It got approved, and then we were able to reach out to DOE and work with our partner in DOE to identify which school, and it happened to be Truman High School that we located that beacon at. So it's a combination of identifying the need, location, and then funding to support that program. For Cornerstones, we spoke about a little earlier. We are going to, there's questions around how many Nycha centers don't have Cornerstone funding. So we're going to take a look at that with Nycha. But again, the next part of that piece would be viability of centers. Are there repairs that are needed? How do we get that center up to par to support programming? And then the funding for it as well. And then SNL, so the SNL question, Saturday Night Lights, comes up weekly for us. How can we get additional SNL sites? So initially we reached out to providers to find out who wanted to be a part of the program. And then we filtered that list through NYPD and the DA's offices across the city to identify those areas of need, or the highest need, to support programming. We are in talks now around additional SNL sites and where they may be located, but we'll definitely keep everyone informed of those discussions.
Okay, so in short, you guys don't really have a methodology for determining which sites are where, which is, I mean, neither here nor there. I would be interested, and I think Councilmember Alexa before me mentioned, like, if you could just send me also where these sites are, if any at all. I don't think I have any in my district. I might have a beacon, but I know for sure I don't have a Saturday Night Lights, and I definitely don't have a Cornerstone because I don't have any Nychas. I have 2 senior Nychas, but that's all that I have in my district. So I would love to get a list if any of these sites exist in my district. And I'm trying to think of like what my follow-up was, because I know Councilmember Riley's question was very similar to mine. I guess just more of a statement, really interested in creating and or finding ways to make sure that we are equitably spreading these programs out in the city. As I mentioned, I really don't have any community centers or programs within my district. And I was thinking maybe you would say something around socioeconomic status is one of the indicators for programs. And then I was going to push back because I know parts of my district don't meet certain thresholds to get certain programs because some parts of my district are middle to high income homeowners. But I think that it's still a disparity because you have a lot of young folks who are going home alone, getting into all types of trouble, even though their parents may own a home, does not mean that they also don't need certain services. So would just love more follow-up information, one specifically for the 27th Council District, and further conversations around increasing programming in my district as well. Thank you.
And Councilmember Williams, just to follow up. So I was responding to like an additional beacon or an additional Cornerstone or SNL program. Globally, we do look at poverty rates throughout the city. We look at youth population we look at other metrics to determine where the vast amount of funding goes. And we've done that over time. And I would say over the past 20, 25 years, there's been a drastic shift in funding and where it goes. And one of the things that you just mentioned made me remember, we had these pockets of need in zip codes that weren't necessarily high need. And we were looking at that. So, the determinant became youth population as one measurement of where to place programming. But we can get you
I'm expired.
sort of the history of the way we look at where funding should go and what our thinking is.
So, okay, so you do have some type of methodology, although not all the way absolute and clear around looking at poverty rates and youth population numbers.
I said that we do look at poverty rates. We do look at youth population in addition to other metrics.
Okay, well, I would love to know what those metrics are in terms of how you guys determine, which sites are located where. And just one thing that I also just thought of, it's not in my district, but it's sort of across the street-ish from my district. Baisley Houses, which is technically in Speaker Adams' district. There was a community center there that has not been open for countless years now. A few years back, a teenager, 13 years old, was shot and killed, like right there. They redid the basketball court, but the community center still remains closed. And I know that PAO at some point ran programming there, but I do think that is a critical location, because within that area of Speaker Adams' district and kind of mine, there really is not any types of programs at all for the young folks there. And there's actually just another murder a few blocks down about a week and a half ago. So that is a need. And I would love to see some support for, and I know it might not just be DYCD, because there might be some infrastructure issues there. And so I understand that it might be an interagency concern, but I just wanted to flag the community center and Baisley Houses. I think it is a perfect location for a Cornerstone or a Beacon or a SNL, all of the above. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams. And the follow-up on Baisley. So we do have funding to support a program at Baisley. We are currently waiting for the renovations to happen before we start programming there.
Yeah, I figured. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams. Seeing no other council members waiting to ask questions, I will now turn it back to Chair Stevens for additional questions. Chair Stevens?
Thank you. I just have a couple of follow-up questions, because I did hear you mention about possibly doing expansions of SNL programs, but that does alarm me and concern me, especially when Ms. Joyce had said that this is our pilot year. What evaluations that will be done before we start expanding a program that we clearly have some issues that need to be addressed before? And also too, I also heard you mention that you guys spoke to providers around starting up the SNL sites, and then it went to NYPD and the DAs to help with like assessing where it should go. Who else was brought in a part of that assessment other than NYPD and DAs? What community members and outreach was done? So those are just a couple of follow-up questions to some of the questioning my colleagues have proposed.
So let me just write this out now. So Chair Stevens, two things. One, so for the expansion, and to be fair, so there are probably 8 centers 8 SNL programs that we're looking at that may not be moving forward with us because of just capacity issues, and it might not be the right fit for that provider. So we are taking a look at who's doing well right now, who's going to move forward.
When you say it's not the right fit for the provider, could you say what you mean by that?
The provider, it just may not be a high quality program that we are expecting. And we may have tried the action plans, we may have tried the support, and things aren't just getting up and running the way we expected, similar to the other sites across the city. So there are less than 10 that we are following on whether or not they continue to keep the SNL program. With that being said, any expansion on top of that will be on top of the existing sites that are doing high quality programming, that are consistently opening week to week. And then
But what will the evaluation process be before you even think about expanding, right? What is the indications of success that you're looking for before we're thinking about expanding? Because how do we know that, like, obviously we know that programming is helpful and useful and all these things, but what indications of success are we looking at to examine to make sure that they're meeting those, and then before we even move forward?
So we're evaluating programs every time we go out. We're looking at youth engagement, community engagement, the quality of the programs that are being implemented, the staff that are there implementing the programs. We're looking at a holistic approach to see, one, again, for the programs that are currently in place, should they remain in place? And then two, the discussion around the other neighborhoods that may benefit from an SNL program is going to happen with our providers, NYPD, SNL. And to your second point, which was, we had this list of sites that are potential SNL spaces. We filtered those through NYPD and the DA's offices, and they were also reaching out to council members' offices as well and getting some feedback. One good example of that is we had an SNL program when weather is permitting at Nostrum Park, and that was Council Members Lewis's office that reached out and said, here's a park where there's a need. How do we activate an SNL program at this location?
But like, did we reach out to like community boards, like other community stakeholders? Like, it's just very alarming that it was like, oh, we put it out to the providers, then NYPD and the DAs, like that. There's other community stakeholders, right? The DAs and NYPD typically don't live in these communities. So how are we getting to the community folks as well?
But the
process?
I got it. NYPD and DA's offices were able to identify, well, where is the need in terms of youth crime, in terms of what's happening in communities, the precincts of the highest crime, things of that nature, on where this program may be beneficial. But we can look at, I can go back to our team and see, like, okay, how do we do community assessments around the SNL programs and neighborhoods that they're in, and get additional feedback.
I could also offer up that we have activated community needs assessments. We onboarded a technical assistance provider that's not only assessing the open closure, but also the needs that are needed to happen so that the activities could live week to week. We're also excited to see our second year and how we onboard other methodologies around SBYD, sports-based youth development, and SEL to kind of lift the program and just beyond sport. Sport is the carrot to get the young people in, and we use that to attach any type of learning modules or learning points with them. And we could also look as far as our technical assistance, how we do that. We do lean on our providers to have that stakeholder engagement, that community advisory, not only with the community members, but for our young people. We lean on them for them to be able to tell us what activities the young people are excited to see, and we then support them and get that done. But we could also bring this feedback as we are looking in our year 2 on how we make sure that the programming is not only fit for participation, but also for high quality programming.
Yeah, no, I'm just a big opponent of, like, if we're going to talk about expansion, and we need to make sure that we're evaluating and making sure it's working and doing the things that we needed to do before we're expanding. And even looking at some of the providers, as you guys can hear, some of my colleagues have had similar experiences where the inconsistency of sites being open or not opening at all, and even how they were chosen, it's a lot of inconsistency. So before we're expanding, I think it's going to be very crucial and significant that we do some evaluations and really have real indicators of success of what we really are looking to do and trying to achieve with these programs. Because I believe Councilmember Vilas asked what were asked around, like, what were the indicators around performances, and it just said, you guys had just said attendance. So I'm really concerned that attendance is the only thing we're looking at for these SNL programs to say that it's successful.
It's not. And you know, I did refer to the pilot year. You know, our goal was to make sure that we have 100 centers open, right? Now, as we go into year 2, we are really looking to embed some of those learning modules, as I spoke about. Like, SBYD is the driving force behind this, learning and seeing how we're getting young people to come into our centers and build upon their competencies and capacity so that they can actually be civically engaged is a true driving force. And I know Darryl also alluded to the fact that we're really excited to launch a youth forward facing initiative that Saturday Night Lights is going to be a driving component of that. More to come on that one.
Yeah, I would definitely love to hear more about that, because it was some red flags that said like this to me when you said youth going from communities, because I would love to hear what does the infrastructure look like to have these young people going from each community safely?
Right.
What are the indications? I have a whole list. And so since it hasn't launched, I will wait for it to launch. And hopefully you guys will talk to me before.
Yes.
So I can ask you all the questions, because there will be lots of questions.
I'm excited for those conversations. I think that will help us think through before we launch.
Definitely. And so I guess I do have some follow-up questions even around Nycha. So one of the issues a lot of our providers have talked about, that they often are responsible for the repairs of Nycha, like repairs in their center themselves, because Nycha takes too long. Does DYCD compensate providers for that? Do we work with Nycha around getting some compensation? Because that is a huge issue with a lot of our community centers, where providers are like, I just got to get this hole fixed, or I got to get this sewage done, or whatever. And so they just end up paying for it themselves. So how are we compensating providers for fixing these repairs?
So Chair Stevens, providers should not be making repairs directly. And I know how that sounds, coupled with them saying that, there may be something of urgency, but Nycha needs to make the repairs, and we need to stay on them to ensure that the repairs are happening in a timely manner.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen. So to say that children should sit in conditions that are unsafe and hazardous is more of an issue.
That also shouldn't happen as well. So if there's an unsafe condition, then we can work to move that provider to a school, which we've done in several cases, until the repair has been completed.
Okay, well, we're going to revisit that, because that is not my experience that I've experienced myself in community centers, where, there are leaks happening and people are just working around it because they don't have any other choices. There are infestations happening, mold, and at some point they'll be closed for years if we wait for Nycha. And so for me, it's like, we need to get to a solution rather than saying like they should just wait, because we know that Nycha has a huge backlog, even with its residents. So even to think like, how do they then prioritize a community center when we have residents living in these conditions? And so I think that model is antiquated, and we need to be thinking about some new ways that we can actually address these issues, because that just does not make sense to me. Because I know for a fact providers are fronting up the cost for repairs, because at what point do you work there as well? Who wants to sit there with the leak happening? I remember my office had mold in it for weeks. And so we ended up just fixing it ourselves, because otherwise I would be inhaling mold spores. So it's a real thing. So I know for a fact, my lived experience, I'm telling you, providers are putting up these repairs themselves because they don't have other choices. What support, if any, does DYCD regard selecting and maintaining program facilities? For example, does DYCD, Alexa already asked that question, I apologize. So I'm gonna move on to DYCD's and DOE and Beacon partnership. So how does DOE coordinate with Beacon compared to the role of DYCD programming with Summer Rising? So how are you working with the programs with Summer Rising coming up, the Beacon programs and all those things happening? What does that coordination look like?
So I'm going to answer it the way I'm hearing it, and let me know if I'm doing the right thing. So Beacon programs are part of the Summer Rising program that's happening in addition to our campus programs. So they've been a part of that conversation for months now. I can't remember if it was January that we started those weekly meetings, or February. So they've been a part of the planning. Every program right now, every provider knows where they're going to be located. They know their seat numbers that they are striving to conduct enrollment on and serve. They're working on staffing at this point. Again, we're probably in 3 or 4 meetings with DOE weekly at this point around Summer Rising and getting folks up and running properly. As I mentioned earlier, the Enrollment Portal launched today.
Don't worry, I'm sure my phone is going to be buzzing a little bit about how it rolled out. So you know they are. You know they're going to call me, so I'm going to know.
Absolutely. If someone calls with an issue, they should contact us. They should let us know. Like
No, don't do that.
we do.
Don't do that. But continue. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh no. We triage anything that comes in to help support providers.
No, absolutely. I mean, when I call you guys are very responsive. So, but providers often just feel more comfortable coming through me at this point. I was them literally a year ago. And one of the major concerns Ethan and I had was some of the principals I spoke to on my tour this upcoming week, where they're still saying that communication still isn't being done collaboratively. There's still information going out to the DOE staff and information going out to DYCD. What are we doing about making sure that this information is being dispersed together and that they have shared goals and deliverables? Because once again, I believe that this is already creating some type of confusion where one set of staff is getting the information at one time and then another set of staff is getting it at another time.
We've been aligning communication both with messaging and timeline on what we send out. I can again check with DOE staff on this, and we can bring this back up on our next call. But we've been working to align communication.
So like I literally had a provider tell me the program director got an email at 9 in the morning and then the school got it the next morning. And so even with that lapse, it just, information is power. So it's important that we are transmitting the information at the same time. And why at this point aren't we sharing out shared emails? Like why are there two separate emails going out? So that's still very concerning. And even the planning process, I know that there was a meeting with the principals where they were planning and talking about some things. And then there was a conversation with providers where they were talking and planning out some things. Like, I want to say again, if we want to learn from the mistakes of last year, one of the biggest mistakes is that we were not working collaboratively and at the same time and having shared goals and deliverable, because it is a partnership. And when we do that, we create a hierarchy. Sometimes, principals don't see DYCD as a partner sometimes. And I even had a principal who told me on Friday that they still do not know who their CBO partner is as of yet, that they were getting a new provider and they still did not know. So I think it's even more alarming that we had applications going out today and the principal did not know who the provider would be. So they haven't met with them. They don't know who's coming in the building and they have no idea who they are. So I can definitely shoot your email offline around the principals so we can get that clarified. But that was very alarming to me when I got that information on Friday. I just have a couple more questions. How does NYPD coordinate with DYCD and providers for SNL programming?
I just head nodded to Joyce as if that was gonna. Could Joyce be unmuted and she can speak to the connection?
On the onset of this program, I want to say it was almost like daily conversations, but we have monthly meetings with our NYPD and local DA's offices where we have updates across the city on how SNL is operating. And then we have our YCOs who go weekly to their designated SNL center to participate in activity. So NYPD is the one that actually
what does that look like?
Oh yeah, so NYPD actually provides the assignments for their YCOs to go out on a weekly basis. We are all on one communication thread where we are communicating not only with NYPD, but also the local DA's offices as far as the opening and closures week to week so that they can inform their YCOs on the strategy on how to go out from week to week.
And so what does their participation look like? Are they the ones running the activity? Are they participating in the activity? Are they working with the provider to do that? What does that look like?
Yeah, first touch point is that they make the relationship with the community-based organization lead. And then from center to center, you'll have a YCO facilitating the activity, participating or developing relationships. So it looks a little different. We're working with the YCOs in that needs assessment cross-city training to kind of develop like the same standard across. The goal in our year two is for all YCOs and our coaches to work as partners in developing the activities for the participants. So when the participant is coming into a center, not only they have the relationship with the coach, but they have thriving relationships with the YCOs.
Does NYPD collect data on SNL participants for law enforcement purposes?
No.
How can you guarantee that?
Well, right now they don't have visibility into the participant, the individual participant, outside of really creating the relationship. So all participant data is in-house at DYCD.
Okay. Is there evidence that SNL programs have had a positive impact on violence prevention?
So this is what I will say. Yes, this is what I will say. Outside of developing the relationships, and that's kind of like the the great data that comes in, you see we'll have those great elevated stories where adults and young people are creating positive relationships. We have been able to create tactical measures if there's been incidences in certain communities, either an argument or a fight. We're able to have all partners come on board, and we have like YCOs and NYPD and local DAs to come in from that week to kind of make sure the community is safe and that the SNL Center can thrive. So in short, yes, and it's growing. Our goal is to make sure that we could have tangible data moving forward on what that looks like. But right now, it's kind of like that aggregate storytell that we're building this year.
Is there evidence that SNL programs have improved local police community relationships?
Yes, it's kind of what I was alluding to. We have great video we could share where you have officers either in an SNL shirt or in full, I was about to say costume, full gear, participating in great SNL activities. So yes, the goal is to make sure when a young person sees that familiar face, it's a relationship that's already formed and not something that is something else. So,
and just really quick, because my experience is that you have like the YCOs and the NCOs, they'll do all that great work, but they're not usually the issue. It's usually the other police officers who are not in these programs. How do we then have this really filter out into the community when there's the majority of the police officers aren't doing this community relations work or really know how to interact with the community?
Right, and I will say that, yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, because like the videos are cute and that's nice, but like that's a very small portion of NYPD. So how could we really have evidence of like this is really helping with community relationship with NYPD?
JC Stevens, I think that's the growing work. I've seen some centers where it goes beyond the YCOs, and I see that the local officers are starting to know where their local SNL center is, and they are going into the centers. And I think that's a goal for us next year to continue that work and make sure that those relationships are formed and that information from DYCD and NYPD is being shared on how we're rolling this out.
Absolutely, because I just don't want us to get lost in pictures of like kids playing with cops and oh my God, everything is great when that is like very surface level and not really getting to what we really need to, which is the trauma that, we have between police officers and Black and brown communities. So I would love us to really think more about how do we dig deep and actually build actual relationships and not just have photo ops and a picture opportunity, which sometimes these programs end up being because we haven't done the work to actually build the relationships.
Right, agreed.
So how does DYCD conduct outreach, increasing awareness of its programming?
So multiple ways. One, of course, social media is like a new thing, right? So we have a huge social media presence, but we also support programs by creating, in some cases, banners for them, flyers that they can help get out. We spread the word through our agency partners, whether it's DOE, Nycha, ACS. We help ensure that information about the programs are out there. We also created what we call Discover DYCD, which is an online portal that parents can go to or young adults can go to find a DYCD program, find a service, enroll directly online through our portal, and become a part of that program. A link to that portal is actually on all of the YCOs. Is it every officer or just all the YCOs? I always confuse that part. But at least at minimum, it's on all the YCO cell phones throughout the NYPD as well.
Are DYCD and providers doing outreach efforts effective is reaching participants who need the programs most? So, often I think a lot of times you go to these programs as young people who are going to come to the program anyway, right? But are we out there really reaching the young people as far as who really need to be here, who are very disengaged from community or don't feel like they're accepted? How are we doing outreach and reaching those young people?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask that Wanda Asher be unmuted. Wanda, I want you to talk about the Beacon Street Outreach Worker that was added on. But Chair Stevens, there's quite a few program providers that do outreach to what I'll call the highest risk young people. So young people who may be crew involved, may be on that borderline, on that fence, to bring them in, to talk to them about like, what are their needs? What do they want to see in programming? They become a part of that program, that become part of service that happens or any civic engagement that happens going forward. But Wanda, if you want to talk about the outreach coordinators.
So, Chair Stevens, in 2017, when we released the RFP for Beacon, we included what's called an outreach coordinator. And the purpose of that outreach coordinator was for that person to be one part of the community, that idea of a credible messenger that knows residents, that knows young people, and can do that street outreach work and bring them back into the program. We've seen a variety of what that role looks like out in the field. In some cases, providers have this person kind of like walk the, I don't say walk the street, but like walk around the neighborhood, really get to know young people, feel comfortable enough to approach a group of young adults, and then bringing them back into the
Question,
program.
are they required to be from the neighborhood? Because I'm also finding a lot of providers are not hiring people from the neighborhood, which also causes a problem.
Yeah, ideally, we've encouraged them to hire from the neighborhood. I completely agree. I think that if you have an outreach coordinator, if you have a program in Brooklyn and your outreach coordinator works in the Bronx, it doesn't work. You're absolutely right. And I think, as the best practice and ideal is for them to be hired from the community. And we work with providers and encourage them to hire from within the community, because we know the impact that it has. But it is a reality, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding that more and more, even on my tours. I went to a number of sites and my first question was, who here lives in the community? And almost all my providers was like, I don't live here, I live, and I'm like, this is part of the problem. You're not able to engage the community in a way that's important. Or my next question is, well, what are you doing to support and have someone from the neighborhood build them up so that they can run these programs? So I think it's one of those pieces that is a huge disconnect that we're really not talking about. And we need to really start thinking about how are we finding community leaders and anchors, if they're not some already, to then bring them into the program and then develop them, because that's really going to be important and crucial for how these programs operate. Having community members, I had a provider say something as to the effect of, oh, my staff is nervous when they're walking to the train station. I said, well, they shouldn't be walking to the train station because they should live in the community. And if you're scared to be here, then you shouldn't be working here. And so those are really, really real statements. And I think it's important. And I think some of the barrier might be coming from, whether it's the education requirement or whatever, but we need to really be looking at how are we developing community leaders. My next question is, how does DYCD efforts and service provisions accommodate undocumented youth and English language learners?
So our programs, especially our community centers, they work with undocumented. So what we're being told, they work with undocumented youth and folks who are English language learners. We have quite a few community centers that are running EAL programs in addition to GED programs across the city as well. For some of those, we partner with DOE, where DOE will provide a teacher at that program site to implement the actual program.
And I just have a question because someone sent it to me around summarizing. What are we doing around families who are not computer literate or tech savvy around applying for summarizing? Because the portal did open today, and apparently a number of parents are having issues because whether they don't have access to technology or not computer savvy and able to do the application.
So one of the things that we did was we did ask all of our community center providers to open the doors to their computer labs and support parents, support anyone that may be having issues enrolling or working to enroll. It's my understanding that DOE did something similar with parent coordinators. So they can, families can reach out to the parent coordinator or walk into one of our community centers for assistance.
Okay, has that been communicated out to folks? Like, how was that sent out to folks? Because like I said, I just had a number of people reach out saying that there was a number of parents who are having issues because they didn't have technology or computer savvy, so they're having some issues. So I would love for us to make sure that if that information is true, we need to make sure we're getting it out to parents because they're the ones who really need it. Does the current funding structure adequately address the cost of managing a Beacon, Cornerstone, or SNL program? I
believe so, but again, I look forward to the concept paper. I look forward to the concept paper release for Cornerstone, where we're going to have those fruitful discussions around programming, quality, and funding. A good example of that was the last Beacon RFP, where historically beacons were funded at 400,000. Well, actually lower than 400,000. Historically, they were 400,000. At one point, they were down to 330, 340 a beacon. And from those concept paper discussions and stakeholder feedback and focus groups, beacons on average right now are funded at 602,000 each. So I imagine that when we get to the point of another concept paper, another RFP, that funding discussion is going to ramp back up.
Oh, absolutely, because it was already underfunded. So, so what extent, if any, does your organizations rely on private investments to support their program? Because I will say this is another issue that I've been hearing, that a lot of providers are in the red running these programs. So they are now out doing a lot of fundraising and looking for private investors to come in and support the programs, because at the funding mark that they're at, they just cannot run program effectively.
So I don't have a number of providers that are reaching out and getting other funding, private funding. Again, for all funding programming, we do encourage both what we call co-located relationships in community centers. So you may get funding to run the base services of which you operate, but you may also connect with another local community organization to bring their services in. What they get out of it is space to operate programming free of charge. And that service now goes to support young people in that neighborhood. So that happens a lot, and we encourage that. Yeah, I would have to speak with providers to see, if there are providers reaching out or saying that they're getting, or they have to get other funding to support the program.
Well, I mean, if the funding per participant rate is low, then obviously they would, have to get additional funding so that they can hire and train people. And so that brings me to my next question. What is the optimal number of staff to run these programs effectively?
Oh, it varies, because so let's say Cornerstones, each program is a different size, so it varies. We do follow all of the DOHMH ratios, so SAC license ratios, which is either 1 to 15 or 1 to 10 for elementary, 1 to 15 for middle school. There are other expectations that there's someone doing the custodial services. You have a director on site, you have an assistant director, evening supervisors, and so forth. But it's going to vary program to program.
What role should stakeholders and advocates play in the RFP process that we keep talking about that should be coming up soon?
So the role that they should play, I think they should play a crucial role in the advisement around the RFP and the type of programming that's going to happen. They should be part of the focus groups, the surveying. They should also support, when we do a survey, getting that survey out to constituents, to residents of different neighborhoods as well. And I'm sure they're going to play a role in the amount of funding that's needed within programs.
Absolutely. What can be done to assist providers with staff recruitment and retention?
So one thing that we've done, and I was trying to think of the date just now, but we just had a participate in a virtual job fair. So providers were able to come onto this virtual job fair. We had folks who are interested in finding employment log on as well. And they were able to do sort of in a different breakout rooms for each provider. They were able to tell the different jobs that they have, make a pitch about the organization, and folks were able to virtually connect with them and sign up. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to assist. I've also heard of different electeds having job fairs in their districts as well.
How can DYCD better support its providers in these programs?
Well, I'm proud of the work done by every staff person here at DYCD. You know, we're out there late at night trying to support and assist providers in the afternoons. I know that, you know, they're on calls with them, text messages, anything they need that we're trying to fix or mediate or help develop and grow that program. One of the other things that we've been doing since, I want to say 2006, 2007 with a robotics pilot, believe it or not, Is we create special
I know my program
initiatives
was
that,
part of the robotics project.
nice. So we create these special initiatives that they can tap into. So in addition to what they're doing, here's this elevated citywide program, whether it's Step It Up, whether it's Recipe Rescue, robotics, that they can tap into. The young people are a part of it. And Joyce, you may want to speak a little bit about Young Sharks that's coming up, where we're going to have Damien John support providers. So Joyce Duvers needs to be unmuted.
Thank you. Yes, as Dara was saying, year to year, we develop these special initiatives. These are opportunities not only for our young people, but for our CBOs to add additional offerings. These serve as either recruitment, retention, incentivizing, civic programs to have young people civic engaged, you name it, we try to create robust programming. But what Dara was specifically speaking to is the Young Sharks. It's our social entrepreneurship program. I want to say this is year 5 or 6, where we have young people across the city develop business plans and take things either prototype to actually product or service, where they're creating ideas and concepts, products and or services to better their communities. And this year we're partnering with the Hip Hop Youth Summit, and we're featuring the curriculum from Damon John. So we're actually, through that collaboration, we're actually going to have an opportunity for our young people who are moving on to receive mentorship and advice from Damon John himself. So this is a great year, a great opportunity. We're looking forward to seeing, and of course this year is focused on what's the hot topic, which is anti-gun violence. So young people have an opportunity to create business concepts to support that initiative.
So with that, do they get like startup money? Do they
do. Okay, let's see if I could do this right off the top. So the first prize I want to say is $2,500. The second prize is $2,000, and then the third is $1,500. Is seed money to start their businesses and support them through prototyping. Mm-hmm.
You know, this is great. I mean, it's a number of council members, myself, Councilmember Williams, Councilmember Riley, and Councilmember Lewis, where we've been talking and really pushing for more entrepreneurship opportunities in our communities. You know, I think that there's a number of things we should be doing, and that's one of them, in addition to vocational trainings and things like that, which has not been done. And when I ran my programs were a part of the robotics team program, and it was a great experience. And I think we need to be thinking about how do we do those things more and connect in that way. Whether I remember you guys used to do the talent shows with the dancing and the singing and things like that.
Step It Up.
Step It Up, yeah, and all those things. I think those were vital and important ways to display the work that was going around throughout the city. And so I would love to see more of those and make sure we're working in collaboration with you. But I think that those are really important parts of the programs. And you know, everyone typically doesn't participate, but thinking about how do we get and ensure that if you're a provider, you at least are participating in one of the citywide initiatives, I think is important, because I know providers have the option of opting in or opting out, but thinking about, you need to opt into one of these because your program should be, focused on one of these things, because they are really good opportunities and the kids absolutely love them. So at this time, Amy, I don't see any more council members who have any more questions. And I am done with my questions, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you can stay on to hear some of the providers' testimony. I know I had a lot of intense questions, but everyone knows that this work means so much to me, and young people mean so much to me. And in the same way, like I said in the beginning, working with the providers, being on the provider side and now being on this side, making sure we're all just working for the same goals, which is to provide quality service for our children and young people throughout the city.
Thank you so much, Chair Stevens. We have concluded the administration's testimony, and we will now turn to public testimony. First, I'd like to remind everyone that I will call up individuals in panels. Once your name is called, a member of our staff will unmute you, and you may begin your testimony once the Sergeant at Arms sets the clock and gives you the cue. All testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. Remember that there is a few seconds delay when you are unmuted before we can hear you. And please wait for the Sergeant at Arms to announce that you may begin before starting your testimony. The first panel of public testimony in the order of speaking will be Dante Bravo from UNH, Kristen Wilson from Jobs First NYC, Sandra Escamilla from Children's Aid, and Anna Stanek. I will now call on Dante Bravo to begin testimony.
Starting time.
Thank you, Chair Stevens, for the opportunity to testify. My name is Dante Bravo, and I'm the Youth Policy Analyst at United Neighborhood Houses. UNH is a policy and social change organization representing 45 neighborhood settlement houses across New York City. A healthy youth services ecosystem that meets the needs of all youth requires both school-based and community-based programming. And recent emphasis on academic programming like Summer Rising has left community-based programming out of that conversation. Our young people face a barrage of alarmist messaging that they are somehow academically behind, despite the fact that they've survived more than 2 years of a pandemic that took caregivers, life experiences, and so much more from them. Community center programming allows young people a space to be in supportive communities that recognizes their skills, their knowledge, and multiple intelligences instead of stigmatizing them instead. UNH makes the following recommendations for summer 2022 and beyond. One includes setting realistic enrollment targets for all youth contracts, especially Beacons. 2, revisit the funding formulas for Cornerstone programming to ensure budgets are sufficient to cover full staffing, especially in summer months when providers offer extended hours. Dignified wages for staff to improve in recruitment and retention of high quality candidates, especially individuals who are from the developments themselves and can understand community dynamics and effectively navigate them, as well as sufficient funding for infrastructure challenges that are a major obstacle in NYCHA sites. While some large providers may be able to make in-kind contributions to pay for the full cost of Cornerstone contracts, it's an unsustainable solution that locks smaller providers with less fundraising capabilities out of the program. As a city, we've attempted to imagine more proactive approaches to public safety, and when fully funded, Cornerstones and other community-based programming give a clear opening to model that vision. Over-reliance on reactive public safety measures and expecting these community centers to continue to operate in these defunded conditions simply continues painful racist histories into the present. Thank you for your time and opportunity to testify today. For more information or to answer any questions, you can reach me at dbravo@unh.org.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Dante. I will now call on Kristen Wilson.
Starting time.
Greetings, Committee Chair Stevens and the distinguished members of the City Council Committee on Youth Services. Thank you for providing an opportunity to speak about these important issues. My name is Kristen Wilson. I'm the Policy and Learning Associate at Jobs First NYC, a nonprofit intermediary that creates and advances solutions that break down barriers and transform the system supporting young adults in their communities in the pursuit of economic opportunities. Jobs First NYC is particularly concerned about the young adults between the ages of 16 to 24 who are out of school and out of work. We join the call to direct resources to key community center programming such as Cornerstone and Beacon. We work with many partners who are providers of these services through our place-based partnerships, and to testify here today to advocate on their behalf and on behalf of young adults in New York City. Of the reported 180,000 young adults who are out of school and out of work in New York, many live in NYCHA communities that stand to gain from enhanced Beacon and Cornerstone programs. An evolved program model that is centered around personal and professional development, academic enrichment, and career exploration, along with a substantial increase in funding for Beacon and Cornerstone, could create stronger educational pathways and skills training for these young people. Last year, Jobs First NYC published a report entitled Equitable Recovery for Young Adults, an Agenda for Young Adult Workforce Development in New York City, which provides a set of citywide policy priorities rooted in the real needs of young people, the perspective of on-the-ground practitioners, and the literature on successful policies and interventions. We believe we must act now to connect young adults to training, education, and work opportunities, and to advance them along educational and career pathways. Two of our recommendations focus on equity and creating a continuum of services. We urge the city to prioritize economic mobility and pathways to prosperity for historically under-resourced and disproportionately harmed communities, as well as create a seamless continuum of integrated services across education and youth workforce development institutions, which includes these important community-centered programs. Thank you very much for your time and for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. I will now call on Sandra Escamilla to testify.
Starting time.
We need to unmute her. She's muted.
I have requested unmuting. Sandra, are you receiving?
Sorry about that. Yes, I just got it. I apologize. Okay. Thank you to Chair Stevens and the Youth Service Committee for the chance to testify today. My name is Sandra Escamilla, and I'm the Executive Vice President at Children's Aid. We are thrilled that the Council is lifting up the importance of center-based programs like Beacons and Cornerstones for many reasons, including that they are the city's primary place-based, community-based resource. Because of the way our schools are set up, after elementary school, students often go to schools in different communities from where they live, and centers remain as a home base for them as well as for their families, a place where their needs are met and where they can grow and thrive. This was evident in a recent conversation I had with a fourth grader who attends our Good Hugh Center in Staten Island. She told me that her mother and grandmother attended Good Hugh too. And like them, she goes to Good Hugh to make friends, learn and be exposed to new things, get help with her schoolwork. And like her mom, she knows that she will get her first job through SYP there. Center-based programs are the places in which we grow, develop, and learn from the next crop of youth workers, educators, and leaders. Look, Beacons gave us Associate Commissioner Rattray. During the pandemic, centers became places where community members received food and medical assistance and stayed connected and informed in general during a time that felt isolating and terrifying. Centers also stepped up to provide emergency childcare and academic support for students in learning labs during the height of the pandemic. When schools were closed, they were the safe, trusted places where families felt comfortable sending their children to be supported as they navigated remote learning. Yet despite the important services and support that center-based programs provide every day to families who are part of multiple systems, they are often forgotten. One recent example is that the summer rising programs in schools will see an increase in rates this summer, but center-based programs will not. This inequity will make it difficult to hire and retain staff, which will hinder center-based programs' ability to provide the needed year-round programming to communities. One unintended impact of the lack of the limited resources is that agencies are competing with themselves in terms of staffing. I can't possibly convince a staff member to be part of a program that doesn't
Time expired.
and thus can't provide better pay rather than going to be transferred to one that can. We cannot continue to draw on the goodwill of center-based programs in the field rather than providing them with the resources to be effective. And to your point, Chair Stevens, to not be burned out. We thank the City Council for flagging this in their response to the preliminary budget, and we are happy to continue to support this council in lifting up the importance of these neighborhood lifelines. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next panel of public testimony will be as follows: Kenneth Jones, followed by Lucy Sexton of the New Yorkers for Culture and Arts, Adrienne Umali, Keisha Roberts of Bronx Works, and Daniel Osario. I will now call on Kenneth Jones to testify.
Starting time.
Did they actually do it? Oh, wait, we're on?
Yes.
Hi, sorry about that. I had to run to the bathroom. It is like one of those terrible things where you get like caught off guard. That was Roxanne Mejia, and she's one of our senior educators. And she was going to testify for me if I wasn't able to make it. But I'm Ken Jones with the Salvadori Center, and I want to thank you, Chair Stevens and the commission. I really want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. There were a lot of suggestions and a lot of excellent questions raised by the council members and the chairs. But we just want to say that we're here for you. You're implementing some wonderful new programs coming up, and there are some really strong existing long-term programs that are still available. Salvadori has been around for 50 years, and we teach kids kindergarten through the 12th grade. We push into the public schools during the day, but after schools, out of school time, which is summer, during breaks, we push into after-school centers across the 5 boroughs. This year alone, we served almost 11,000 students in over 4,000 sessions. So all of our sessions are multi-days. They are always collaborative, project-based, hands-on. But the really cool thing about it is that we've learned through a study with NYU that a student who takes Salvadori is 18.5% more likely to think school is relevant. And when a child thinks school is relevant, they not only pay attention more, their grades improved, their absenteeism decreases, graduation rates increase, and they're more likely to succeed and to see themselves as successful. So besides teaching science, math, and the arts, the collaborative project-based approach to learning gives kids confidence to communicate effectively, the ability to collaborate and learn from others, and to know that they don't have to have all the right answers by themselves. They can build strong solutions with others. So thank you for the testimony. Forgive me for being late. And thank you very much for the opportunity. And we're here to support you.
Thank you for your testimony. My apologies, I skipped over Anna Stanek, which might be explaining why you were unavailable when we were called. So I will now turn to Anna Stanek to testify.
Thank you.
Starting time.
Members of the council, fellow panelists, and members of the public, I want to thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. Getting right into it, because I know I have a lot to cover. Yes, in both New York City public and private schools, of course, there's the major issue in both the areas of sustainability and also food insecurity. At the end of every school day, all school cafeteria meals that are left over from that day's breakfast and lunch service get thrown away. This results in an incredible amount of food waste from our schools, and it takes up space in landfills that we can't afford to be wasted. The Department of Sanitation in New York City states that they already have a zero waste initiative for the city's schools, but this initiative does not eliminate food waste from meals, as you cannot compost animal byproducts such as meat, eggs, and dairy, or foods that come in wrappings such as chips or a number of common items in school cafeterias. Instead, the Zero Waste Initiative focuses more on school recycling and compost collection. What's more, the program is only available in 50% of New York City public schools. On the New York City Department of Education website, they advertise that they offer free breakfast, lunch, and after-school meals to all New York City public students during the year. However, there are a number of requirements and parameters that schools need to meet to participate in this program, which results in a number of students falling through the cracks. This program aids in providing for schools, but does not address the issue of food waste in our schools. Last year, in a widely popular decision, Councilmember Jimmy Van Bramer sponsored a legislation for the DOE to be required to pass a food waste prevention plan. But as an individual that works in New York City public schools, I can personally attest to that legislation not being as effective as we would have hoped, as there's still pounds upon pounds of food being thrown away every day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. I will now call on Lucy Sexton, followed by Adrian Umali, Keisha Roberts, and Daniel Osario. Lucy, you may now begin.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Stevens and members of the City Council for this important and urgent hearing. My name is Lucy Sexton. I'm with the Citywide Cultural Advocacy Coalition, New Yorkers for Culture and Arts. As you know, many cultural organizations contract with the Department of Youth and Community Development to deliver critical programming for our city's young people, from dance classes to summer camps to professional music training to science courses in our zoos and gardens, and so much more. These programs are often the only access to culture that young people in low-wealth neighborhoods have. And those organizations can provide story after story of the impact of their work has on young people and the invaluable service they provide to families and communities. Unfortunately, DYCD, as you know, is a broken system, and the cultural organizations who contract with them are at a breaking point. The structure of the system itself is problematic, requiring the work to be completed before 80% of the funding comes to reimburse the costs. Add to that the chronic and destabilizing delays in payments of months and years, and you have cultural organizations deeply in debt and struggling to meet payroll. I got a call last week from a 30-year-old organization in East Flatbush that provides cultural programming to children year-round. They are still waiting for tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars owed to them by DYCD for the summer camp they produced and paid for last year, and for various other programs completed before that. To state the obvious, this is particularly a problem for lower budget organizations, often led by and serving communities of color who do not have access to reserve funds to float them while they wait to be paid for jobs they have done and done well. The Comptroller's recently released report, A Better Contract for New York, a joint task force to get nonprofits paid on time, clearly states, quote, as a result of the city's delays, nonprofits are forced to take out loans and incur substantial costs to keep themselves afloat. I strongly suggest that the council consider moving DYCD funding from a contract to a grant structure. So the organizations would get the money to do the programming and supply detailed reporting afterwards on how the funds were spent and what programs were delivered. Realizing that necessary shift may take time, I ask that the council immediately take steps to make the process more transparent so cultural organizations can see where their funds are in the process and have a clear idea of when those funds will be delivered. This is the only way organizations can plan prudently. I'm happy to put you directly in touch with the cultural organizations experiencing these problems so we can all work together to find solutions. And I would be remiss if I did not also include the current sector-wide ask for support in the city's FY23 budget, culture's visionary investment in building the economy of New York City. We need to work toward a city with services, culture, arts, education, and safety for every New Yorker in every neighborhood. And culture is key to that vision. Thanks so much for allowing me to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll now turn to Adrian Umali to testify.
Starting time.
Hi, thanks so much. Good afternoon, and thank you for the chance to speak today. My name is Adrian Umali. I'm here representing the New York Academy of Sciences. We are a nonprofit committed to advancing science for the benefit of society. One way we do this is through programs aimed at increasing the number and diversity of students who pursue careers in science, tech, engineering, and math. One such program, our after-school STEM mentoring program, was created in 2010 in partnership with the DYCD. This program recruits talented scientists and equips them with the tools and supports needed to teach a 10-hour curriculum to elementary and middle school students at after-school sites around the city. Our curricula focuses on hands-on learning, where students are actively taking part in the science of exploration instead of just hearing or reading about it. They engage in activities related to coding, forensic science, AI, and even climate change. We work very hard to make sure that the content of our lessons are relevant and accessible to these students, but truly, one of the most important things we do is to simply put scientists in front of kids. Prior to starting our program, 64% of our students say they have never met a real scientist before. And this is significant because, as the adage goes, you can't be what you can't see. I found that when students think of a scientist, they often have very stereotypical images of an old man with crazy white hair, wearing a lab coat, blowing up chemicals in beakers. Our program gives students opportunities to not only meet, but to build connections with scientists over a 10-week period, to see them as real people, to hear their stories, and to understand that a STEM career can be pursued in many different ways and result in many different things. Since 2010, we have placed over 1,000 real scientists in DYCD-funded after-school classrooms around New York City, and these scientists have in turn helped more than 15,000 students develop an interest in STEM. I'd like to end by saying that the events of the last few years, including the coronavirus pandemic and the continued growth of online misinformation, have made it clear that now more than ever, we need students who can think critically, who can problem solve, who can work well with others and be resilient when things don't go as planned. All tenets of a good STEM education, and all skills that can be fostered successfully and in a low-risk way through after-school programs. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your testimony. I will now be calling on Keisha Roberts, followed by Danielle Osaria. Keisha Roberts, you may now begin.
Starting time.
Thank you, Chair Stevens and Youth Service Committee, for allowing me the opportunity to testify on behalf of Bronx Works, the Cornerstones that we operate, which are 4, and the staff that we have every day, taking their time out to provide engaging services to our participants unwaveringly. For the past 2 years, our staff were essential workers. They came out and they actually did not mind services our youth. A part of what we've learned in the 8 years I've overseen the Cornerstones is that the Cornerstones is a great model. It has great intentions on making sure that our young people have a safe place to be, a place where people understand them, and a place of belongingness for themselves to have their voices heard. However, a lot of some of the programs that we receive from DYCD also requires staffing and the time of staffing to work so many egregious hours. With that said, we need to be able to have some kind of conversation around compensating these staff on livable wages, maybe reducing some of the hours of the Cornerstones and sustaining the budget so we can afford right staff who will put more heart into the programs that are so craftedly well. To do this, we need to have sustainable wages and look at the fact that we have recessions that our staff cannot live and work such programs at the same time. It does not work for them, and it will not work for us as well, because we have to choose between either having great programming or paying our staff. That then ends up where we do not have any staff, recruitment is low, and then the number of youth workers to ratio to children suffer. And here comes DOH with their violations. Let's rethink this plan, for it is a viable program that I wholeheartedly adore.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll now call on Daniel Osorio to testify.
Starting time.
Daniel, we have requested unmuting. All right. We might be having some issues reaching our final panelists. So I will turn to Chair Stevens if you have any questions for our public witnesses.
No, I don't have any questions as of now.
Thank you. Well, we have heard from everyone who has signed up online to testify, and seeing no other council members with their hands raised. Chair Stevens, we have concluded today's hearing. If we have inadvertently missed anyone that would like to testify, please use the Zoom raised hand function now, and we will call on you in the order in which your hand was raised. All right, seeing no hands raised, we have Chair Stevens, we have concluded public testimony for this hearing. We appreciate everyone's time and presence. I'll now turn to you for any closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the committee members who came on today to ask their very intense and important questions. Thank you for the administration for showing up and taking part in the many questions that we had, and the public for their testimony. I just wanted to reiterate that one of the reasons why I believe me and the committee was going so intensely with our questions is because these are programs that we believe in and that we love and that we know will make a real change in the communities that are suffering the most. So I'm here to say that providers, we're here to support you and uplift you in this work. We're also here to work with DYCD to make sure that these programs are being rolled out adequately and efficiently. Cornerstones, beacons, and community center programs are so near and dear to my heart. I say it all the time that I love these programs because I firsthand have seen how it has transformed lives and saved young people's lives when it's done correctly. And I repeat, when it's done correctly. I believe that it's important that providers are held to a much high standard of working with the community and using them as a resource and hiring from within the community, because it's so important. There's so many jewels that are walking through our streets, but we have to learn how to cultivate all of those leaders in the communities. So thank you guys for being here with us today. And this concludes our hearing on community centers, beacons, Saturday Night Light programs, and Cornerstones. Thank you all for being with us.